Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar. We are going to proceed in about 1 or 2 more minutes, so just hang tight whilst everyone comes into the room. Thank you. Okay, we'll make a start today. Before we begin, I'd just like to do an acknowledgement of countries. So I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of country throughout Australia and their continuing connection to the land, waters and community. We pay our respects to them and their culture and elders past, present and future. So welcome everyone to today's webinar and masterclass for the Master of Applied Finance at Macquarie University. My name is Luke and I'll be the moderator for today's Q&A component. Today we are lucky to be joined by the Director of the Macquarie Business School, Lindesay Brine, and also by Associate Professor Shane Magee. So they will both talk about the Master of Applied Finance and be on standby for any questions that you might have about the degree or just generally about studying at Macquarie. So the format of today's event will be as follows. I'll pass it over to Shane shortly, who will give a masterclass, which is a taste of the degree. And then this will be followed by Lindesay presenting on applied finance and what you can expect from studying at Macquarie. Finally, before the session concludes, we will have a short Q&A segment. So if you have any questions now or throughout the webinar, feel free to pop it into the chat function you see at the bottom of your screens, and we'll try and get to as many as we can. So the purpose of the masterclass is because we understand that getting fully committed to postgraduate studies can be quite overwhelming. So we want to share this masterclass, which is a session straight from the Master of Applied Finance program, so you could have an experience of the class and get a real taste of the teaching and the curriculum at the Macquarie Business School. So I'll now hand it over to Shane to get us started.
Okay, sorry about that, everyone. So my name is Shane Magee. I'm an associate professor at the business school. Just to give you a little bit about my background, I teach in the financial instruments unit within the Master of Applied Finance, which is one of the core units. I have also taught in the Finance Principles Unit, which is a foundation unit, and the Financial Risk Management Unit. And once upon a time, I was once a student in the Master of Applied Finance as well. So what I want to talk to you today is really about green investing, and we'll talk about terms like ESG. So again, this will just give you a taste of the things that we can do and an overview of this very topical area of research and practice. All right, so let me start off here. So what we've seen over the last few years is a dramatic inflow of funds going into environmental, social, and governance funds. So we saw last year that there were 500 ESG funds launched just during 1 year across the globe. We also saw throughout the first quarter of this year, with the onset of COVID-19, that globally ESG funds attracted inflows of $45.6 billion US dollars, compared to outflows, significant outflows of $384 billion in the overall funds universe. We also saw in Australia that ESG funds attracted, again, significant new inflows into the first quarter of 2020 throughout the COVID crisis. So we're seeing a dramatic inflow of funds going into the ESG sector. So why is this? Where a lot of the observation is that the growth in ESG funds under management is that people now have an increasing awareness and concern of what the global sustainability challenges are and the social challenges faced by firms and in general. And so we're also seeing a changing investor landscape with many, much more younger investors coming into the markets now, who are fully aware of the societal and environmental issues around the world. So that's tended to drive an inflow of funds going into more sustainable investments. The things I want to talk about today is that what we see is that many fund managers actually claim that ESG funds can actually deliver superior performance relative to other types of funds. And we actually saw during the first quarter of this year, in the midst of the COVID crisis, that ESG funds actually did outperform their equivalent balanced and growth funds that didn't have an ESG component. They outperformed by about 1%. And over the last 12 months up until March, it was around 1.5%. Some of the reasons for that were typically, that the ESG funds, they invest typically in the non-cyclical type of sectors. And so they're investing more in IT and healthcare firms, as opposed to the wider universe of funds. So that's probably what drove that higher performance throughout that period. We also see that some fund managers claim that they will be able to force companies to reduce emissions. And here's the big question. Can the finance industry really save the planet? All right, so I just want to ask you something now. I'm going to run a poll and I would like to see your feedback. So I will launch this question now and let's just see what everyone thinks. Okay, so we're nearly done. I'll let it just a few more seconds and I'll close the poll. All right, so I'll end the poll now and I'll share the results with you. It's quite interesting. It's pretty much a third all across. Got some pretty optimistic people in the group suggesting that the finance industry can save the planet. Then, of course, we've got some no's. And of course, this is why you are here. Some people want to hear more about this idea. All right, so thank you for participating in that poll. And we'll continue talking about, can the finance industry save the planet? Okay, so just a few more things. The Economist did some research recently and published this research in The Economist. And what they found is that, or what they claimed is that green finance suffers from woolly thinking, marketing guff, and bad data. So we will explore these ideas throughout today's session, because what we want to look at is what are the shortcomings of green investing or ESG investing. So yes, we can see that the finance industry does have a role in fighting climate change, but we'll see that a more rigorous approach is needed. So let me go into some further details here. So what is ESG and which one is more important? So we've got environmental, social, and governance. This gives you an idea of the factors that ESG rating firms and also in fund managers, what they look at in measuring environmental, social, and governance. What I would like to ask you is I would like to get an idea from you which one of these components, the E, the S, or the G, which ones do you consider to be the most important? So I will run another poll here and I'll see let's get your feedback on this. Okay, so I'll end that poll and let me just share these results with you. All right, it's interesting that governance, just nearly 50% of you suggested that governance was the most important factor. And that's been quite true, particularly in the beginning of the ESG days. Governance was the key factor in the early days of ESG investing. And primarily up until COVID-19, governance has been the primary, the most significant of these three. Things have changed a little bit since COVID. So there was a global survey, or a survey done by Fitch Training just recently. And the participants in that training session, they concluded that social was now the key area through and after COVID-19, particularly around the issues of diversity of workplace and product safety and in supply chain management. And of course, community impact is a big one as well, particularly when you see the likes of Rio Tinto with the issues that they have had in mining around excuse me, key Aboriginal sites. So social is becoming a lot more prevalent now. We would also think the environment is, and it tends to be with the environment. That's what most investors are focusing in terms of sustainable investors. All right, so let's move forward on this and let's have a think about some of the shortcomings of green investing and ESG in general. So the first one I would say is materiality, in that how much control do fund managers have over their ability to enable firms to make the right decisions. So it's often noted that some fund managers will make claims about their influence and their ability to influence the corporate boards. But it's actually the fact that many of those emissions that occur are outside of the companies that fund managers have shareholdings in. So again, recent research by The Economist suggests that publicly listed firms only account for about 14 to 32% of the world's total emissions. The other emitters are going to be governments and state-owned enterprises. And so it seems to be that fund managers, even though they do make the claim that they are able to influence corporate emissions with the companies that they own shares in, it's, most of the emitters are outside of publicly listed firms. So that's an issue. The other one is marketing. So again, you see a lot of fund managers claim that they are running an ESG overlay or ESG portfolio. But it seems to be that, again, we're seeing that we have a significant inflow of funds from the younger investors who are aware of the societal issues and climate issues. There could be an argument that some fund managers are wanting to get onto the bandwagon, if you like, in order to offer products or funds that claim they have a sustainable investment strategy, but they have limited ESG capabilities. And so the risk here is that investors pay higher fees for those funds that actually have a basic sustainable investment strategy. Okay. The other one is voting intentions. So it's important that when we think of a fund manager who claims that that climate change and ESG issues are at the center of their investment strategy, then it's important that they follow through with their strategy. So, is it all talk with the commitment to voting for a fund manager, or does the actual fund, does the fund actually vote in favour of resolutions that do put pressure on the board and change behaviour? So a classic one here is BlackRock, and every year the CEO of BlackRock puts out a letter to the CEOs. And during January, the most recent letter to CEOs, BlackRock put on notice CEOs and said that climate change is going to be at the centre of their investment strategy. But we actually saw recently that BlackRock actually voted against some shareholder resolutions for Woodside Energy here in Australia and Santos. And these shareholder resolutions were calling on these two companies to set targets in line with the Paris Agreement. But BlackRock voted against those resolutions. So it's important that what companies say they do, they actually carry that out with their voting intentions. The other one is measurement. So ideally, a fund manager would like to objectively measure a company's ESG impact. But in general, we see that the corporate ESG disclosures are generally bad. And what we're seeing now is fund managers resorting to using ESG ratings created by external rating providers. But there are quite a few of those rating providers around. And so it's important to ensure that we have consistency across those ratings so that investors can make well-informed decisions as to which companies to invest in. The other issue there is that, of course, when these ratings are used to form indices and then benchmarks for the ESG funds, sometimes they can include firms that are actually big polluters and haven't been screened out. Okay, so where do we go to from here? I've listed a few of the issues. Let me just now think about where do we go from here. If we can think about disclosures, it is important that firms do improve their ESG disclosures. So it would be useful if companies and investors could agree upon a single ESG reporting standard, so that we could streamline the data collection process and produce more quality data, which could then be used by the rating agencies. And also that data would be more transparent and credible for the investing community. I think we also need to think about how we can reduce marketing gimmicks so that we can set coherent and measurable objectives. And more importantly, so that we can provide greater transparency by fund managers on their ESG investment strategy and also the shareholdings that they have. It is important to understand, it's important to know that when a fund claims that they are an ESG friendly fund, that investors can actually see what their ESG investment strategy is and what actual firms they hold in their portfolios. So the other thing following on from that again would be that we need to see much greater consistency across ESG ratings to ensure that we have credible and meaningful ratings that investors can rely on. And the other important thing that I would state here is that we need fund managers to vote in accordance with their voting commitments. So fund managers, if they are claiming that they are serious about acting on climate through their investment strategy, then we need to see that come through their voting strategies on shareholder resolutions relating to environment. All right, so I'll say one more thing here, and this is a big thing that's been happening or has happened last year, and we'll see more of this into the future. So we have seen governments and some companies issue green bonds, which are really bonds that allow the firm or the government to fund an environmental project. What we saw last year, which is quite innovative, is where we saw Sydney Airport issue a sustainability bond that was tied to ESG targets. So what they issued a 1.4 billion, that should be, sustainability linked loan in 2019. So this actually allows Sydney Airport to use the funds for general corporate purposes. So it wasn't necessarily directed towards an environmental project. It can be used to fund the acquisition of any assets. But the other thing, and this is the important thing, is the margin on this sustainability linked loan. So this is the margin embedded in the interest rate, in the cost of funds. The cost of funds will vary depending on whether the firm meets its ESG targets. So it will increase as it meets, the margin will increase when the targets are not met, and the margin will decrease when the targets are met. So what we're seeing is that with this type of loan, it enables a firm to reduce its cost of capital as it meets its ESG targets over time. All right, so let me just run one more poll and I'll get feedback. We'll come back to the first question that we looked at. I would like to launch again just to see if your ideas have changed. All right, so I'll end that poll in a few seconds. Okay, I will end it now, and then I'll share the results with you and we'll wrap up. So quite interesting. Still have a lot of, quite a number of people in the group who are pretty optimistic that the finance industry can save the planet. Some possibly, and still some no. So some interesting results to think about there. All right, so I will finish up here. If you have any questions, yeah, please use the Q&A and we'll answer those for you.
Thank you for that, Shane. And thank you everyone for engaging with that. We saw some great results there in the polls. I'll now hand it over to Lindesay, who will continue this webinar.
Thank you, Luke, and thank you, Shane, for that enlightening presentation. And indeed, great that you use the example of Sydney Airports, because we actually have a webinar next week where Sydney Airports will talk a little bit more about that sustainability-linked loan and also their experience with COVID-19. But what I wanted to talk to you about today is finance, applied finance. And no, James Bond hasn't had a career change, but many people who approach our courses do. And the title is intended to make it clear that this is not your usual finance, it's practical and real world, and it's applied. So what do we mean by this? Well, it is finance with a difference. They're very much finance for people who have experience in industry. With sufficient professional experience, someone without a bachelor degree can study the Master of Applied Finance. The post-experience nature also means that you will be studying in a cohort of people at similar stages of their career. So these are people who are working in industry, and they can contribute their experience, and you can learn as much from them as you can from the lecturers like Shane. So you might actually be someone who has a lot of experience in finance and is looking to broaden your financial knowledge, or you might have previously not worked in finance at all, and you're finding that you need to work more with financial concepts, or you actually involved in raising finance, or you might just have an interest in it. And many people discover down the track that they do have an interest in finance and they want to move into that area. So we have a number of entry points and pathways that are available to you to enter into this. You can start along, if you have a bachelor's degree, you can start a long Masters of Applied Finance, which actually gives you the financial knowledge that you would need to start the program. Or if you have work experience, but you don't have a bachelor's degree, we can offer you the Graduate Certificate of Finance, and then you can move on to doing the Master of Applied Finance after that. So whatever career in finance you're after, there are core and elective units that will be relevant to your potential career path, whether it's banking or investments through general finance, or indeed senior management. Chief executives like Rob Scott from Wesfarmers and Elizabeth Gaines from Fortescue have completed the Master of Applied Finance to ensure that they have the finance knowledge that they need to lead their company. I know of one example of one of our students in Beijing who was the CEO of a medical technology company, an AI company. Having completed an MBA, she then completed a Master of Applied Finance to ensure that she had the requisite knowledge to fund her business. So people who need to understand about finance come to do the Master of Applied Finance, and whether you're aiming at being CEO, CFO, or if you want to work in corporate treasury, corporate and institutional banking, business valuation, investment management, or superannuation, there is enormous flexibility to mix and match your units. So what are we talking about with our course? So what you can expect is an interactive experience, both individually and in groups. Your lecturers will be academics and industry practitioners who are able to give you a real world perspective. Our learning includes online activities together with interactive discussions and tasks which are normally conducted face-to-face in our Sydney or Melbourne classes and currently done online. And indeed, we use a lot of the techniques that Shane used in his presentation to make that a more engaging experience. Class times are intended to fit in with work times. Evenings and weekends are used to ensure there is no clash with working hours. And of course, the focus is on application to real-world problems. Our alumni are our greatest advertisement and often guide students to enroll in the program in the first place. That's because they have used the skills and the knowledge that they have learned to develop their career after finishing the Master of Applied Finance. In this case, they have been able to use the skills that they have acquired through the Master of Applied Finance in their work and gain great value from it. In this case, they were able to use the fact that they had the Master of Applied Finance to get into a new position and be accepted and excel in it. These are all important pieces of feedback, and we do ask our alumni to pass on the message and encourage others to do the course. Now, if you want to know more details and you want to know more information about how the program actually works, the fine details are available on that website, mq.edu.au/business. We will be providing the link to everyone. And equally, we have the capacity to have individual consultations where if you want to ask questions about your individual situation, perhaps not in a webinar, then that's fine. We can actually set up that session and have that discussion with you. And any other questions, we're more than happy to answer now. So what I might do is I might just switch it over to Q&A. I know we have a lot of questions already about the ESG presentation. Hopefully we'll get some questions also about how the program works or how the course works. So I might hand it back to Luke to start facilitating the Q&A.
Thank you, Lindsay, and thank you for that great presentation there. And yet we do have a few questions coming through. We might throw one over about the ESG presentation to Shane. We had one question about climate risk and someone asking that it is quite a complex issue and that it might, if we combine it into S&G, it might somewhat, they say, dilute the importance there. They also ask, because many investors might be more inclined to track only climate risk, should this change?
Okay, yeah, good question. Okay, so I think, yeah, you're thinking whether the E and the ESG should be separated. I actually think, you know, I think there is more and more focus now on firms' emissions. And when we're talking about sustainability, investors tend to be looking at their climate, their impact on the climate. But I also think that is highly related to societal issues. So if we think of Rio Tinto and their impact with their explosions, that has impacted communities, but also impacted the environment. So there is a relationship there, I think, between the environment and societal issues. I also think governance is wrapped up into this, because when you think of the ES and the G, the governance aspect there is designed to ensure that companies are governed in the right way to meet their targets for climate change and also societal impacts. So I think that there is an argument to pull the E out, but I think it is important to have them all together, because particularly think of the governance as the overlay, the one that wraps everything together to enable firms to achieve their targets.
Yep, thank you for that, Shane. We had a question about these personalized sessions, and I'll just put something into the chat now. So I hope you can all see that. If you would like to book a 30-minute consultation, you can do it via that link there, or you can phone up the future students after this session. So feel free to do that if you'd like. We had another question here for you, Lindsay. Somebody was curious about, can they still apply to be enrolled for this year? And when are the dates for that?
Sure. So for term 4, which is the next intake for the Master of Applied Finance, the original cutoff was actually the 2nd of August, and we've extended that to the 9th of August to allow participants today to enrol. If you go to that website, you can see all the things that you need to enrol in the course, and you have until the 9th of August. And what I would suggest is that if you have an interest in applying, have a good look. Have a look at what you have to do and get that done. If you're still struggling, please give us a call because we can help you out.
Yep, great stuff there, Lindsay. We've got another question for you, Shane, about the ESG ratings. Someone is critical of the ESG ratings themselves, and I'll read out the question. If I recall, the economist saying ESG ratings makes credit scores before the global financial crisis and makes it look like gospel truth. So what are your comments on this? And how is this being dealt with by the ESG fund industry?
Good question, David. Yeah, I can see the question here. Okay, so I guess I think there have been quite a few issues, like with any credit rating agency or any rating agency, whether that be credit or ESG. There are issues with the ratings, particularly when you have quite a few firms claiming that they are able to generate, credible ratings. So I think the main firm that's gaining traction is Sustainalytics, which is owned by Morningstar. So Sustainalytics they are the ones who are rating the sustainable bond issue by Sydney Airports. So I think over time we'll see more credibility in the rating agencies. There just needs to be greater, collaboration in order to reach the end goalpost, if you like.
Yeah, fabulous. We've had a few questions, people concerned about COVID-19 at the moment, and I might give this to you, Lindsay. People asking about how will the classes be delivered, especially for the next session. Will they be fully online? What's the situation?
Sure. Look, at the moment, in term 2 and term 3, all of our classes have been delivered fully online, and matching the timetable that originally was put in place. Term 4, we are hopeful that we can offer some classes as face-to-face, but it's quite likely that a significant number of them will have to be done as an online class. And obviously that is a fluid situation. It's a situation that may change between now and the start of term 4. What we are undertaking to students is to keep them fully informed about what we're going to do. And so we will be sending something to all of our current students, and anyone who enrolls in term 4 can expect that either they will be doing online classes or face-to-face where available. And where we are doing online classes, we have put a significant effort in obviously making sure that the experience is as good, if not better, than if you had enrolled in a face-to-face class. And
with students who are going into university, especially with COVID at the moment, what is the support like specifically for students' mental health, but also possibly financial from the university?
Yeah, we have a number of support services. In particular, we have had support, special support for students who are impacted as international students, and anyone else who is impacted. There are a number of wellbeing programs as well, together with study support and support with online learning. So there are significant resources available, and they are actually outlined in the website and also in our student system.
Yep, fantastic, terrific. So it's all on the website if you do still have those questions on that COVID-related stuff. A question for you, Shane, back on ESG. Jeff here asks, what do you think are the relative merits of trying to influence either company behavior on ESG issues by either 1, divesting, or 2, by investing but being actively engaged?
Very good question. This is, I think this is interesting because what you have is the main players who are out there changing their climate strategy, or their investment strategy for climate change, and promoting that. They are the index or the passive funds. So we've got State Street, BlackRock and Vanguard. They are the three, those three funds hold the majority of shares in most corporations around the world because they own the index, if you like. They're passive funds. And so I tend to think for these firms, they actually have a greater incentive to actively engage with companies around their environmental and social activities because they can't divest, they can't sell out. So if a firm an active fund manager could sell out of a share if they're not happy with its ESG performance. But for the index funds, they can't do that. So they have a much greater incentive to engage with corporates on ESG issues.
Yeah. And moving more to degree stuff. So Lindesay, Edith here is asking about which courses in the degree, or I believe units referring to, are relevant to portfolio analysis or fund management. And have you had anyone graduate successfully? Where have their career progressed from here?
Thank you. Great question. And it actually reminds me that I don't give enough of those stories in some of these presentations. We have had many graduates who have gone into investment management and funds management. In fact, it is one of the more popular parts of the course. We have a number of units which deal directly to it. We're actually in the process of increasing the number of units that are applied to investing. One of them will encompass ESG investing as well. So we have a number of people that come in from various fund managers and investment managers, and they are there to develop their knowledge and expertise in the area, and also obviously to learn more from their fellow students. So they go on generally to further careers. In fact, one of the lecturers in portfolio management and valuation, Slava Platkov, actually graduated with me and has been at Dimensional Fund Management for a long time. So they're people that are actively engaged in the industry and are doing really well at it too. And look, they've even moved overseas as well. There are many of our graduates who work in funds management, investment management offshore, and we have roughly more than 5,500 graduates in 43 countries, and an awful lot of them have done the portfolio management and investment management subjects. So yes, there's plenty on offer there. And if you want a career in investment management, there are many of the units that will suit your needs.
That's great. And is there any way that future students could connect with these alumni?
Oh, absolutely. There's alumni functions on a regular basis. Current students are generally invited to those as well. And we're looking to deepen the links with our alumni. So having student functions where they get to talk to alumni who have succeeded in their particular field. And we're going to be lining those up later this year. It's a matter of, like most things, of just organising it, and it will be a Zoom session too.
Fantastic. And we've had some really great questions coming through. We'll try and answer just a few more. So if you have any really burning ones, feel free to pop it in. Of course, you can always book a consultation if we don't get to answer your question in time. So we have one here. One's disappeared. I was about to read, that's okay. So we have one here from Edward. If I don't have 2 years of financial experience, and I'll start the graduate certificate of finance leading to a master's, is this correct? So that's probably for you, Lindesay.
So it would depend on whether you've got a bachelor degree or not. The two components that we need to have for the master's is a bachelor's degree and postgraduate experience, work experience. So you must have professional work experience. Your work must have involved some level of judgment and also specialist knowledge. So in recent times, I think we've had someone apply who has been a commercial air pilot for 12 years. That's professional experience because it's specialist and it's judgment. So the really important thing is what your work experience is. And so we look closely at that. If you've got a bachelor degree, then if it's not in finance, you would enter into the longer Master of Applied Finance. But if it is in finance and you have sufficient work experience, you can do the shorter Master of Applied Finance. For those that don't have a bachelor degree but have plenty of work experience, that's where the graduate certificate really comes in. The graduate certificate has a number of people who will go on to do the Master of Applied Finance, but it equally has a number of people who just want to learn more about finance and don't have that background and want to really get into some of the nitty-gritty of what goes on in the financial system.
Mm-hmm. Great. Another one for you here, Lindsay, from Matthew, just about the accreditation coming from the Master of Applied Finance. And do you get credit for this moving into the CFA?
Into the CFA, we don't have credit into the CFA. However, there's a lot of overlap between our course and the CFA. What we generally find is people who undertake the Master of Applied Finance will find CFA level 1 a little bit more relatable. It's not, you're not just studying it on your own, you're actually getting a chance to talk to others and also you know, shop ideas around and think about the concepts and discuss the concepts rather than just study for them. So it is helpful for that. CFA does actually give you some coverage of the foundation units if you don't have a degree. So it's a useful thing to have.
Right. We've got an interesting one here for you, Shane, back on the ESG being something that's subjective. So some people would want a fund manager who screens out this and that, but can we ever have a standardized approach to measuring ESG when it is a subjective concept?
Okay, so there are standardized benchmarks. So Morgan Stanley generates ESG indices, and they are standardized by the ratings. So it's, you know, you'll see most funds will have different strategies, whether they focus on just environmental issues or whether they focus on like ethical investing. So it is a vague concept, and I can't see it being standardized, except if we go down the path of having standardized ESG ratings. But funds will have their own investment strategies, and they just need to be transparent to their investors.
And does the Macquarie Masters program offer subjects about the ethical questions in investing? Is it within a subject or is it just part of the course?
That would be within individual units in the degree. So particularly in the portfolio management and valuation unit, that would be discussed in that unit. And I imagine it would also be discussed in elective units like applied portfolio management.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yep. Another one here for you, Lindsay. This might be one of our final questions from Angus, asking, is business valuation specialization per CA designation still offered?
Okay, so the business valuation specialization was developed with Chartered Accountants ANZ and helps members of Chartered Accountants ANZ to get the business valuation designation from them. And we still offer all of those, that is still available. The specialization itself doesn't exist, however, it is actually based on the units that you do. So there is a structure or a program that you follow that then gives you that designation from Chartered Accountants. And indeed, you can do a graduate diploma and do that, or you could actually do the Master of Applied Finance and still get that designation. The key is you've got to do the right units. And if anyone would like to do that one, I'm more than happy to take you through what you need to do. It is fairly simple to arrange.
Great. And we'll wrap up on this final question for you, Lindsay, here. Someone's just asking about the flexibility of the program in terms of how the classes are delivered. So if someone's working full-time, can they still have that balance of working and studying and still have a life?
Well, I know I'd managed to do it. I don't know how I did it, but I did. I'm sure Shane would say the same thing. In general, if you're studying if you're studying part-time, you're going to be doing about 15 hours of work a week. That will be split between classes and your study and your assignments. So in my experience, when you're not in class, you're generally going to spend a lot of your weekends working on things. and some of the nights as well, but otherwise you can still have a life. I think one of the things to remember is that if the weekend blocks will only ever be 2 weekends out of a term. There are other weekends, and you should still go and play sport and all those sorts of things. And you probably want to go to the pub too when you can.
Absolutely. Great advice there to finish up on. Thank you again to our panelists for their time and for their wisdom there in the past hour. And thank you everyone for attending to this webinar and masterclass. I hope you got a lot out of it. If you missed part of it or you'd love to watch it 2 times, 3 times, it will be sent out to your emails and be put up somewhere on the website. Again, if you do have any further questions, you can always book a consultation via that link there. And apart from that, you can also contact the future postgrad students team on that phone number or via email. So apart from that, enjoy the rest of your week and thank you.